Hey everybody, it's Dr. Jensen, and this is Module 3, Media and Crime Control, Part 1. I'm very excited about this module because it's one of my favorites. We get to go revisit things that maybe you remember experiencing as a child or as a young adult, and things that have changed now, maybe things that you see your children seeing. But it's really interesting to see how we've used advertising and campaigns to try to get people to be safer or kind of scare the would-be criminals. So the essential question in this module is, how does media and technology actually reduce crime? There are several ways that this happens. So one way that we use media and crime control is pro-social programming, like shows like Sesame Street, where we try to teach kids values that will hopefully stay with them so that they avoid things like theft and bullying and they try to get along with others. Another one is public service announcements, PSAs, that can range from all kinds of different topics that are meant to provide awareness to the public, and they target different audiences. You also have the use of media technology in crime control through cameras and surveillance in squad cars like dashboard cams or body cameras that police wear, and out in the public sphere attached to traffic lights or even on your home residence. Another example would be data storage and information sharing, like we've seen in the sex offender registries, and that came forward from Megan's Law, which was part of your earlier chapter reading. That was one of those symbolic cases that brought forward that law. So this is the module where you'll start to see more of this content. McGruff the Crime Dog, and Crime Stoppers, and some of these kinds of things. Now, just for fun, a little background about McGruff. McGruff the Crime Dog is a bloodhound in a trench coat that serves as a detective to help kids. Most of the time, McGruff and the National Crime Prevention Council is targeting young children, third grade and under, so 9-year-olds and 9-year-olds to 5-year-olds. He often has a nephew named Scruff that's a puppy. This is not Scruff, this is another young person he's talking with, that targets crimes like cyber crimes and cyberbullying. McGruff has been around since the 1960s, so he's been around for over 50 years now, and he's taken on various forms. He's been in cartoon form, they've had costumes, people that dress in dog suits and do school assemblies. You've seen puppets and certainly t-shirts. If you grew up in the 80s, you'll remember McGruff said to take a bite out of crime. And so again, that message is to be safe, careful, and protective, and recognize wrongdoing and trouble when you see it. So I actually have McGruff and other PSAs like Crime Stoppers, as well as a few other examples to show you in the module that are only a couple of minutes that will start to remind you of some of what we're looking at in this module. So notice there is a shift here. The shift to the relationship of media to crime control instead of what we were studying before, which is media as a cause of or a capture of crime and criminality. So in this module, I want you to pay attention to the ways in which theories can be employed to help understand this prospect. We'll also look at some of the research and what the research suggests on the effectiveness. So what theories are used to argue that media can actually affect crime control? Well, there are a couple out there. How well do media apply theories of crime control? So once we have an explanation that shows some merit, how well do we do in executing those principles in the actual content and campaign that's developed? Might claims of effectiveness for media for crime control be actually exaggerated, where we think we're getting a huge benefit, but we're really not? And we can tell that from the last module, Module 2, they were actually exaggerated on the impact of media on crime, especially for things like copycat and aggression and violence. So again, as you'll recall, remember, there were either no relationships or extremely weak relationships or inconclusive evidence to show that effect. So we're going to see what we find here. So first, pro-social programs and PSAs. Why do we think pro-social programs like Sesame Street can work? Well, we've done imitation studies with children, and we've done these for 60, 70 years now. So kids will show positive behaviors after viewing a pro-social program like Sesame Street. And they actually do stay with them beyond the lab or beyond the study. They do need to be reinforced. And various entertainment forms are presented in a show like that, where you have comedy, animation, some fantasy and adventure. So it's very captivating for young people to watch. Remember, these types of shows are targeted for children in the preschool and toddler years, and then the shows start to change a little bit later. Consider how theory could help us critique what's happening. Now remember, every single media campaign has to pay attention to its market audience. So as children get older, they become more sophisticated media consumers and having a lot more choices and determining what they want to watch, or they become even a little skeptical of things they used to watch, or it doesn't have the same effect on them. They mature, they know more, and they're into different things. The theory we could apply to understanding how all this works is social learning. So, can more exposure to pro-social messages by the media help offset the negative messages? And so remember, when we talked about social learning theory last module, we had frequency, priority, duration, and intensity. And those were the 4 ways we tried to measure the messaging and how well it's doing and something sticking with someone. So then we asked these questions. If they're a regular viewer and they watch these kinds of things daily, they're going to get high frequency. And you do find fans that develop of these kinds of shows, not only for things like pro-social messaging, but also learning ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, right? There's a lot of other messages that can be learned. So it tends to be there with frequency. Will the effect work better with impressionable kids than adults? So this talks about priority, that modality. Obviously, a show that's more targeted toward young people is going to be more important to them than adults, but the more successful shows actually expect parents and children to be watching together. So they try to make sure that there is content that's appealing to adults as well, so that it can be a priority for them. Will any effect be transitory instead of lasting? So how long does it last? What's the duration of what's going on? Do they have to watch so much over time? And again, will it stay? And the research shows it stays really quite well. But then the final question we ask is, will these media messages be overcome by definitions from family and friends, the intensity modality? So, we're going to take the lessons from family and friends a lot more seriously. They're going to be more intense to us and than what we see on TV, because we can kind of reduce that to something that's staged or maybe even fake or doesn't apply to our lives as well as real life experience through interaction. However, again, the successful shows have tried to invite both parents, family, friends, adults, and children to watch together, so that hopefully it can drive further conversation and discussion about what was learned, where the family can start to amplify those messages. With public information campaigns, you saw an image in your textbook of a poster called Reefer Madness. And let's take a look at that poster right now. So Reefer Madness was a film from 1936. It was a propaganda film to scare people about using marijuana and all the negative effects it could have. It's really silly at face value. It has a small cult classic following to it, and you can actually get a copy from the Library of Congress. But it was created by different organizations that were very agenda-laden. I've actually seen the film myself. It is very laughable because the effects they were trying to show of marijuana users were not matching up to what actually happens when you use marijuana. It looked pretty crazy and silly and strange. And users left saying that's not accurate. And non-users went, really? I never thought that. And so it was quite confusing for the public to see this. But essentially, there were lots of groups, national campaigns, church groups that actually financed the film. The FBN, not the FBI, actually produced the film exaggerating the evils of marijuana, and they created this folk devil that we've talked about to attack. We need to go after this villain, this evil marijuana. And it created a moral panic, or at least it was trying to create a moral panic. Years later, over 30 years later, Dixon's study showed that the FBN distorted the information to protect its funding. and its bureaucratic existence. See, we have to go after this vilified drug, we matter, and you have to keep us going to do that. So this is a reminder that media use and crime control is not always benign or beneficial, and it can actually be kind of damaging and really disenfranchise people from public involvement and even public information campaigns altogether. Anti-crime ads, you'll remember seeing these, and we'll talk about a few examples, and I have examples on Module 3 for you to look at. These are anything from Crime Stoppers to, again, McGruff and DARE and kind of hotline type things. So Table 8.1 I have in the next slide, but there are generally two program types: those targeting offenders with threats of punishment and those targeting citizens through victimization reductions through citizen participation. So this is what the chart looks like in your text. So first of all, the first section is targeting offenders, and then the second section is targeting citizens. So the only one really out there is the deterrence approach. So basically, the behavior that we change and that we seek to see change is a voluntary reduction of criminal behavior by criminals themselves. So the mechanism is scaring those would-be criminals about the punishments. And sometimes you'll see things like current offenders saying, it happened to me, it can happen to you, I'm behind bars, or maybe you'll see current drug users saying, look at all the medical problems I've had, and this could be you. Some examples include anti-media piracy ads, drug use PSAs, and there's some classic ones out there with the scrambled egg. You know, this is your brain on drugs. You'll see this also in photo ads that show kind of disfigured drug users, or again, people behind bars, and some of those really drastic punishments. And it's a scare tactic, essentially. These are not particularly useful. There's not a lot of research showing that they work. One of the classic types of things that we'd see, especially in the 90s, is we'd see those boot camp or Scared Straight shows on daytime talk shows. And they were great drama for those shows. And then they'd do a follow-up 2 weeks later. How are the kids doing? How are the adults doing? And they weren't lasting effects. So, you know, it made good daytime TV, but as far as creating more permanent behaviors, they didn't. The second set of programs target citizens. So here we have victimization reduction programs. And this is the behavior where we seek that people adopt self-protective behaviors and crime preventative behaviors by citizens. And the way we see this happen is target hardening, or making it more difficult to commit a crime and creating an impenetrable environment. An example would be protecting yourself against identity theft or vehicle theft, locking up, and that actually walk you through steps that lower your chances of victimization. So another way of thinking about this is we call it victim control. Let me give you a list of things that you need to do to keep yourself safe. And these can be relatively useful, actually. There's some research to suggest that these can work. We also have citizen participation programs. And the behavior change sought is increased public cooperation and involvement with law enforcement efforts. So they want more integration of people talking to law enforcement so that they can be assisted to get the details they need to better do their job. The mechanism is usually through monetary rewards and anonymity. So we have this hotline, we have a Crime Stopper number that you can call, a place that you can text to send your photos. And essentially, the example is Crime Stoppers and police investigation requests for those cell phone videos and images to say, please give us evidence, please send us surveillance, and help us develop that suspect pool. We will keep you anonymous. So again, this is just a table that kind of helps us sort out all these different media campaigns and understand their purpose and how they work. So let's link this to theory. Are we actually using something solid to base these ideas from? Target offenders by scaring them to reduce their crime. And again, the theory behind this one is deterrence theory or rational choice theory. So we use what we call vicarious punishment to deter, where you have those inmates saying, I got a 10 or 20 life sentence because of my firearms, violations, and again, frying eggs to represent brains on drugs. So this is where we try to put the focus on risk. And again, not necessarily as successful. Targeting citizens and doing victimization reduction. And this is where we get into that target hardening, like better locks or alarms. This is actually borrowed from routine activities theory by Marcus Felsen. We saw some of Felsen's work in Module 2 when we talked about some fallacies and beliefs we have about crime that might even be spawned by the media. So routine activities theory you'll come into contact with a little bit more in criminological theory class, but CPTED is one that you'll see a little bit in our text. So CPTED, CPTED, is crime prevention through environmental design. So this is where we look at lighting on the streets, we look at pedestrian walkways versus parking, and physically engineering some of where we want people to go and where the criminal enterprise and opportunities might be by doing kind of people engineering. This is where we think about things like cash handling practices, bars on windows, surveillance, and some of these kinds of things. So we actually modify the environment in order to reduce your victimization. The last one is that participation and cooperation with citizens. In there, encouraging cooperation with authorities, with positive reinforcement. I'm going to give you this $1,000 reward if you give me a crime tip that leads to an arrest. And then negative reinforcement. I'm going to remove something bad that you don't want to happen to you. So retaliation. Maybe you're worried that someone saw you filming with your cell phone camera. So I'm going to keep you anonymous. So I'm going to reduce your risks and I'm going to increase your benefits to participating with law enforcement and increase the clearance rates, thereby deterring the certainty of punishment. These actually can bring forward social learning theory again and a little bit of deterrence theory. And again, they can actually be pretty useful and beneficial. So kind of to wrap up, I'm going to show you the research on McGruff the crime dog. So this comes from a study that actually looked at prevention practices by being exposed to McGruff. And if you look at these lists, it's lists of behaviors that we would want people to do regularly. Keeping indoor lights on when you're away from home to appear home to burglars, locking windows and screens, keeping doors locked even when you're home. When you're away from home, do you have someone watch over your residence? Do you remove delivery of packages, newspapers, or stop your mail, or ask someone to bring it in? Do you get together with your neighbors to discuss steps to take against crime? Do you bring something with you to use as personal protection against being attacked? And what we show is that people actually were doing these things, and the numbers for always were quite a bit higher for the McGruff participation as compared to another program called We Prevent. And we actually showed significance on personal safety as well as on neighborhood watch, where they were trying to do community-based protection. The final chart shows group level phenomena that was a program goal of McGruff and We Prevent. So does your neighborhood do neighborhood watch, citizen patrols, crime stoppers, police foot patrols? Do you use community anti-crime newsletters or have rallies, marches, or forums within your neighborhood? Do you have drug-free school zones? And are you closing crack houses in your neighborhood? To me, that was kind of the most amusing one, because that would take a lot more than just a neighborhood campaign. But certainly the neighborhood campaign would be a first start. And again, we can see some effects that were quite useful in these campaigns. So yeah, actually we did see some significance with McGruff. Not so much with DARE. If you remember the DARE program, DARE to resist violence and drugs or abusing drugs. It also targets a higher age group. So McGruff targets kindergarten to third graders, and DARE actually targets 5th grade to 7th graders. And, you know, that's a different group to have to market to. So yeah, not as good research on DARE suggesting it's effective, but McGruff, we show that it's been effective. Finally, we have one other thing to keep track of in this module, and that is the announcement effect. So we go, wow, we're bringing attention to it. We're saying it's a big deal. Is this going to backfire on us? Are we going to actually have what we call spillover effects, where maybe crime just moves from one place to another because there's a lot of intense advertising going on here, so we're just going to go over here where it's not being done. So behavior can change once something is announced, even before a new policy goes into effect. So there was enough publicity about a Massachusetts gun law, which led to changes before the law was even implemented because of concerns about the law. You can have announced speeding crackdowns, and that can slow down drivers regardless of whether the enforcement actually increases. So sometimes just having announcements or the perception of a crackdown is coming or changes are coming our way can actually lead to behavioral changes. However, but these announcements effects do not last very long. They can be a little bit fleeting. So for this module, we're going to look for those long-term changes to separate the policy effects that are more permanent from just the announcement effects, which are very temporary. And we'll see you next time.